Here we're going to show 5 COPIC pens of different thicknesses of the nib. We're going to show you how they interact with the different kinds of paper, and we're going to use 3 different types of paper to illustrate that. The first paper we're going to use is the Multiliner watercolour paper, 300 GSM, fine grained. Bit of an unusual paper to use, but I like to use it sometimes. The first pen is a 0.5, which is thicker than the kind of pens that I usually draw with, so it was a bit hard to get open. I'll just do what I call a soft draw, which is a line drawn without any pressure on the pen. The pens don't really require downward pressure unless you're attempting to achieve effects or to make a really dark line. I'll show you a line with pressure. You can see that that's much thicker, and you've got to be careful not to apply too much pressure to the nib because the nibs are easily ruined. You can replace the nibs, but they cost money. The next pencil, or pen rather, is a 0.2. Should be much finer, and you can see I didn't keep consistent lack of pressure on that. This pen nib is a bit more worn out than the previous pen. This is a little bit thinner, but not noticeably so. Now we go to 0.25. It should be thicker than the last draw line. And just a little bit thicker. With pressure, you can see that that's just a little bit thicker. And now we'll try the much finer pens. This is a 0.05, much more the kind of pen that I'm used to drawing with. Much lighter line, and with pressure, again a much lighter line and much finer. Applying pressure to these size pens will destroy the nibs very quickly. And now for a 0.03. Finer. You start to see that the smaller pen has trouble getting ink onto the paper without pressure. Now you can see that out of the 5 pens you probably only need 2 out of those 5 to be able to make reasonable drawings. You don't need a lot of different pens. The important thing is to pick the style of pen size that suits you. Now with a 0.05, I'll show you what the roughness of the paper does to a line. This is a sine wave without pressure, and you can see that it hasn't made a consistent line across the paper. If you apply pressure and move more slowly, you get more ink in and you get a more consistent line. understanding what the paper is going to do to your stroke is important. and you really need to select the paper for the kind of drawing that you're doing. Unlike a pencil, you don't get the luxury of removing anything you put on the paper. So here's a quick indication of what shading does. Pretty much just like shading with a pencil or just the hatching. Yeah. You'll notice here that the paper doesn't give way very much, and that's because this watercolour paper is sized and doesn't absorb much. So now I'll move on to a medium texture drawing paper of about 200 GSM. We're back to the 0.05. Draw the line and see that it makes very poor marks. Even on the pressure line it breaks it up, and on the other line it can miss areas altogether. Sine wave, and we find that the sine wave is very broken, and again the sine wave with pressure is still incomplete, though a lot better. Just to show you how different the lines are, these are the lines from the previous. Now I'll move on to another drawing paper, Lana Dessa 220. It's a finer grain paper that gives you a much better result with these pens. Back to the 0.05, you'll see the lines much more complete. With pressure on, you get a very continuous line. The paper isn't sized, but the 220 GSM does give you a lot more firmness in response to the pen. The sine wave on this one is more complete without pressure. And with the pressure, you see much more complete again. So much easier to get the ink onto this paper. Again, we'll show you what the previous lines were like. You get a very different outcome from this. That's our session for Multiliner pens.